So hello everyone and welcome to this introduction to video-based bat emergence survey monitoring for white nose syndrome. I'm very excited to have such an incredible turnout. We have 144 people joining us right now and over 200 people registered. I do want to thank right off the bat the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for funding this webinar and the work that we'll be telling you about today. So I would just introduce myself for those of you who I have not yet been able to meet. My name is Aaron Corcoran. I am a professor of biology at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, where I run the Sensory and Movement Ecology Lab. I've been a professor there for the last 6 years or so. And last year, I founded ThruTracker-NABat, which is a startup to bring video-based monitoring techniques to the community of bat and wildlife researchers around the world. I have over 20 years of experience using technology to study bats and other wildlife. I started in the realm of acoustics. I actually helped with the development of SonarBat back in the day and have transitioned more and more to using videography for initially basic biology questions like studying echolocation and flight behavior, predator-prey interactions, and have more recently moved obviously towards the more applied realm of realizing how much these technologies can be useful for monitoring bat populations. I also want to recognize the team of biologists who have been helping behind the scenes with developing the different resources that are now available for you all who are interested in using ThruTracker and video-based monitoring techniques. Kristen Jonassen and Abigail Schultz. They're both on the call, and Kristen is going to be moderating today. And if you have questions, please put that in the Q&A, and she'll be looking at those questions. I have put in a few places in the webinar to address your questions, so I'll look forward to having those. All right, so today we have a lot to cover. This is the first of a two-part webinar series, and today is really setting the stage, trying to get people exposure to video-based techniques for studying bats, starting with why would you want to do this in the first place? What are the potential uses? How do you choose a camera? What sort of cameras can you use? Do we recommend? How do you deploy cameras in the field? When you go in the field, how do you approach this? And we're going to go through a variety of use cases throughout to demonstrate the potential here, including looking at monitoring bat boxes, buildings, bridges, and caves. If we have time at the end, I'll do a brief introduction to using the ThruTracker software, although I'm largely going to save that for the second webinar. So let's jump right in. So as many of us know, we have been fighting white nose syndrome for over 20 years now. I started my master's degree when I first started studying bats in 2003. I still remember the NASBER meetings in 2006, 2007, when we were all just first learning about this mysterious disease that was killing bats. And it's kind of crazy that it's been 20 years since we've been fighting this. And obviously, our continent, North America, we have what's left over from this devastating disease. And so the funding for this project is to help monitor bats in the various stages of recovery or exposure to white nose syndrome. So why does the ability to count and monitor bat populations matter for white nose syndrome? Well, in the eastern United States, obviously, those populations were hit hard early on, and many of those have been exposed for quite a long time now. Obviously, the populations declined very heavily, and there may be evidence of some of those populations starting to rebound. And it's very important, obviously, to monitor those populations and see if that's actually the case from a more widespread perspective. Out in the West, PD is still arriving in some areas. So I'm in Northern California right now. My home base is in Colorado, two states where PD is still relatively new. And being able to monitor bat populations that are just being exposed to PD is obviously also really important. Vaccine trials are underway in a lot of different locations. A number of the people that I've been working with are testing out vaccines. And so being able to monitor to see if vaccination efforts are working or other experimental applications to prevent white nose syndrome is also important. So whatever the stage of white nose syndrome or PD distribution in the area, being able to track the populations is obviously going to be important. And I will say that, video-based tracking is one tool that we have at our disposal. We're trying to advance, and we can often use that in concert with other technologies. So this leads right into NABat, or the North American Bat Monitoring Program, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with to some degree. And I'm not sure everyone realizes that NABat is not just for acoustics, it is for all different kinds of surveys. So I just took this from their homepage the other day, and they have a summary of the different kinds of surveys that are currently archived in their system. And so you can see here on the right of the screen, the most popular or common survey is stationary acoustic monitoring with 161 million records. Internal Roost surveys are secondary, and emergence counts would be a far third place at about 5 million. And I think some of this has to do with the stage of technology development that we've been in, where adoption of acoustic monitoring has been pretty far ahead of some other technologies, such as video, which I'm going to be talking about today. Now, I do want to highlight that NABat and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service do not endorse specific technology providers. They do support the development of these technologies, and we are working with them, although they are not specifically endorsing this particular technology. And I want to take a moment here to highlight that I know you all know this, but I just want to reiterate for ourselves as a community that data matters. The quality of the data that we have at our disposal matters. And each roost that we have on a local level, it might be easy to think it may or may not matter, but it does. Each roost, each bat that we have out there is really important, especially when we can use that data and collate it at the state, regional, and national levels. And so that is my intention, is to help improve the quality of data that we have for monitoring these populations. And that leads us to our mission, which is to protect nature by making video wildlife surveys mainstream. As I mentioned, if we make a comparison of the current state of technology for acoustics, which many of us are more familiar with, versus videography, I would say from my position that video-based techniques have really lagged behind. You could argue that we're maybe a decade, 2 decades behind where acoustics has been. If you think about the technology providers that are out there for acoustics and how long they've been established, knowing what sort of equipment to get, knowing how to use the software, having trainings available. A lot of that just really hasn't been on par for videography versus acoustics, and that is part of the gap that we here at ThruTracker Analytics are trying to fill and help bring us all up to speed. If you think about that also just from the community knowledge perspective, lots of people have more experience on that acoustic side. We're trying to get that and share that information, not only from us, but from the people who are out there and have had more experience doing the videography to help coordinate and communicate with each other. So my biggest take-home message for you today is that you can use videography to improve the science and conservation work that you are doing today. The technology has finally caught up. The equipment is there for you to use. It's reasonably affordable. The technology is there as far as the software. It's not that difficult. We have really finally caught up, and we're at the point where this can be brought out at a large scale. So don't be afraid to try. Today, I'm going to get into a lot of detail about suggestions for what cameras to use and how to set them up. But don't let that get in the way of you just getting what you have, putting it out there and trying it out. Get whatever camera you can afford, put it out there while you're doing other research, and try these techniques out. And then you will learn as you go. And you now have the support through us, through other people who are doing this to help you get over those barriers. So that's my big message for today. So why use videography? The first would be, and kind of maybe obvious, but maybe not, is for getting accurate counts of roosts as they emerge. So this is the primary use case that we deal with. And I have an image here that's showing some processed video of bats emerging from a bat box. And this is showing 32 bats here. So with acoustics, we can get some proxy for how much activity there is for different species. But with acoustics, you really can't know how many individuals are present. With video, if done correctly, we can get a very accurate count for how many individuals are present at a site, and that can augment the data that we're getting through other survey means. Second, in many situations, it can be beneficial just to know if bats or other wildlife are using a roost. So this was a site I just visited a week or two ago, and there were 7 different houses. This could apply to a bridge that might need maintenance on it, or a house, or any kind of structure. It may not be so important to have an exact count, but you really just want to know, are the bats actually using that structure? Now, you could put acoustics out and have an idea if bats are nearby, but again, acoustics wouldn't tell you if the bats are actually occupying that structure, whereas video certainly could. And then the third one is video can provide a level of behavioral detail and insight on what the bats are doing at a structure that you really can't get with other technologies. So for example, where exactly are the bats roosting in a structure? Where are they flying? And how can we use that information to help with capture efforts? So I'll just tell a little anecdote of an outing I made just last week, and this was to visit these structures here, this same spot that I showed the pictures of, and bats are known to be roosting in these old abandoned buildings. This is kind of a very interesting spot. And there were about 7 of these old buildings. This is in Northern California, one of the first spots that PD showed up in California. And so this is a place where people are trying to do vaccine trials. And it's interesting because at this location, they've boarded up the windows of this building. And you can see here on the top left that you can just go into some of these buildings with permission and permits, obviously, and see how many bats are present. And just a couple of months ago, local biologists had gone and counted upwards of 200 bats just in the windows. So I was able to visit the site to test out some videography with a local biologist, and there were only 6 bats left instead of 200. And so we were worried in just another week, people are going to be traveling across state to come to this site to vaccinate the bats. And if there was only 6 bats present, then it probably was not going to be worth their time. So fortunately, we did have multiple cameras that we set up in different locations. At first, I only saw half a dozen or so bats come out of the first building, but at the second building, when I went to the site in the field, I just looked through the thermal monocular and I could see a whole bunch of bats coming out of the building. Now, it's not surprising that the bats could have moved, but I was able to document and count 130 bats that were using one of the structure. And in addition, we could film it and see that they were using the back door of one of the buildings as a primary flyway. And so when we go back, or when biologists, when we collectively go back to capture the bats, now we know exactly where we can set the HARP traps, mist nets, in order to catch those bats to help vaccinate them. And without that camera data, the whole effort may have been canceled, or even if we returned, we might have been targeting the wrong location, not knowing where the bats were actually roosting. So I would just say, even if you don't have a specific roost you're trying to count, it can really be useful if you are mist netting, if you are going out to locations to do visual observations, to have some equipment with you to assist with those efforts. It's almost like having a whole additional assistant that can see in the dark, working to double or triple your efforts as you're going out to the field. Now, in addition to the software for processing counts, which has definitely been a bottleneck, we've highlighted that we need people to have the confidence setting out to do this, that there is an end-to-end workflow available to do this kind of work. And I can confidently say that that now exists from the point of we have the documentation for having never done videography of bats in your life. How do you get started today to figure out the equipment that you need, how to deploy it in the field? How do you deal with that data? How do you get useful information and insights from it? And then how do you archive it? Once you start getting all this video and count data, etc., we need the support to be able to process it and manage all of that data. So those are the three core areas that we have focused on as we have developed ThruTracker, not just the software, but the full support and backend for that. And so I'm really excited how far we've come along, and we're building a lot of different pieces. I don't even have time to talk about them all today, but this should be a useful introduction for folks to at least get started if you haven't already. And so we're going to dive in. Just a little bit more background before we get into specifics on how to do this. I started developing ThruTracker as a software program. I am a coder by training. I started in computer science and wildlife at Purdue University way back in the day. I've been coding ever since. And in 2017, I developed the first version of ThruTracker, which was released for free on my website. And until 2025, I was slowly developing that and making that available for people. There were some people using it. I got a lot of useful feedback from folks. In 2025, there was a change in the funding situation, as many of us know and experienced. So I lost all my research funding as a professor at University of Colorado, and that really gave me the ability, and I decided to use a different model of turning ThruTracker into a startup and using that to really push the software forward. And I'm very excited to say in January of this year, we released the first full version that was recoded from scratch in Python, learning all the lessons from over 8 years of testing and making the software what I've always wanted it to be. We just released the full version. We left beta about a month ago, and dozens of people are using the software, dozens of organizations around the US, around the world, and the feedback has been tremendous. So I'm really excited about all the progress that we've been making and the trajectory that we're on moving forward. So again, our aim at ThruTracker is to make this mainstream, to make it so that people know about the technology and they have the confidence to move forward so that we can get better data that can be organized and put into NABat and organized at state and regional levels to have better bat conservation. And our intention is to be a support, a place where information can be shared. And yes, we do have a lot of expertise in this area, but I would still say that you as the user you are the local expert. And I can give you suggestions on how to get started, but ultimately you need to be the person who becomes the expert at your specific local location. And the tips that I have for you today, hopefully that's enough to get started, but it may be different in your particular situation. So our goal is really just to share that knowledge and be a place to accelerate the adoption of these technologies. So for full transparency, I'll just give a context of how this all works. ThruTracker is a for-profit institution. We license the software for $395 per annual license. There are academic and nonprofit discounts. As part of this grant, if you are doing survey work that is related to white nose syndrome monitoring at all, then you may be and very likely are qualified for 2 years of free licensing. And so just contact us. We can give you a license code. If you want to try the software out, you can. There's a 10-day free trial. You can go to our website and do that for free right now. If you want an extension on those trials, we can also do that at this point. And those licensing fees, that allows us to have employees, to have the support to keep developing the software for different operating systems, for different use cases, year after year. And it allows us to do things like we are currently in the process of developing a free citizen science online version of the program. So we'll have a ThruTracker cloud. This does exist. We haven't released it yet. That has a training academy that anybody can go and practice processing and see videos of dozens of different examples. In addition, we have a cloud version of the software that we're working on so that if you have difficulty getting the software on an agency laptop or you need more processing power, then you'll be able to process the videos in the cloud as well. We also have conservation technology grants that people are starting to use this around the world. And especially in developing countries, we make the software available at either free or extremely low cost. And we are starting to ship hardware out to people either for loans or for specific cases for permanent use. That all is made possible through those licensing fees and other inputs to ThruTracker. So for our subscribers, the people who are on board who have already paid that, thank you. I hope you can have confidence that those funds are going to good use. All right, I'm going to start. The next section is getting into the details here. I'm going to stop after this slide and answer any questions that have come up. So if you have any questions at this point, now would be a good time to put those into the Q&A section. Before we do that, and before we get into the specifics on cameras, I want to give an overview of what we are shooting for. Now, I specifically have saved the nitty-gritty of getting into the software, and it's not really nitty-gritty because we've made it really streamlined. It's not that hard, but I've saved the software tutorial. Mostly is going to be for the next webinar, but you do need to, it's helpful to have an understanding of what we are generally doing here. So in the software, what we are typically doing is we're in the context of trying to get counts from a Roost, is we're taking video and processing it in such a way that we're going to draw a virtual Roost exit on our video. And so we want to capture video in such a way that we can draw a box or a polygon or multiple boxes around the Roost exits, such that when we track a bat that is going from the inside of the box to the outside, or we also call it a gate, when it leaves the gate, then we get a +1 from our count. When it goes back in, we get a -1. And this allows us to, because bats are often going out, they're coming back in, and we have to assume that if they're going back in, then that is subtracting from our count. So we keep track of that. Over time, we have a tally, and then we take the maximum, the highest value of our net count over time, and that is our count that we get. So this is what we are trying to aim for when we go out to record bats. We want to get our Roost in the field of view and filmed in such a way that we'll be able to draw that gate around our structure to count the bats. Okay. All right, I'm going to pause there and see if we have any questions.
Yeah, we have about 3 questions. So the ones that kind of address some of the big picture topics, I think you'll get into a bit more detail later on. But how would you deal with a colony that has multiple exit points and multiple volumes that vary daily?
Okay, good question. In some cases, if there's multiple exit points, if we go back to our situation here, there actually were multiple exit points on this video. So if you can get the multiple exit points in view of your camera, then in the software, there is the ability to draw multiple boxes or polygons. In other situations, you might need multiple cameras. And then you can just basically sum up your counts from your different cameras.
Awesome. And then we have Allison Travers that's asking if it's been used to monitor hibernacula that are too dangerous to enter.
Not quite yet hibernacula counts, but that is something I think is going to be possible in the future. With hibernacula, typically the bats are going to be coming and going over an extended period of time. So you would want to have long-term video monitoring. That's something that now is possible. And we can set up a camera for weeks or months at a time and basically have a net count that's aggregating over that entire time. And theoretically prevent the requirement having to go into a hibernaculum at all.
And that leads into Derek's question really well, that is asking if we have thermal cameras that can be programmed to start and stop daily or at intervals so they can be left unattended.
Yes, so we are working on that. I didn't put I'm going to talk about specific cameras here. The main camera that we're using right now, I'll talk about, is the Scout Pro, and that one is somewhat configurable. It's not really designed to turn on and off over long periods of time. So if you did want to have that ability over a longer period of time, that would be a higher end camera. The Axis models of cameras that are a little bit more expensive and is going to require some more hardware, but it is possible.
All right. And then aside from bat boxes, what conservation efforts would you recommend tracking bats in response to?
Okay, a great question, and we're going to get at that in later on in this talk. But the short answer is, so bat boxes, buildings, caves, bridges, anywhere you can find bats.
Awesome. And I think that's most of the stuff right now. And I think the other questions that are in there you're going to be getting to.
Okay,
that will keep
awesome.
following.
All right, I'm going to keep chugging along here. So next, I'm going to talk about specific cameras because this is usually the place where people want to start. I will say, if you have a camera, if you already know how to image bats and you can look at a video, you can record the bats in such a way that you can see them, you could count them, then ThruTracker should be able to work with them. In most cases, I am recommending that people are going with thermal cameras, so I'm going to start there, but you can also use near infrared or even visible, just normal cameras like on your phone in different cases. In addition, we are working on a specific site, a web page on our site that is going to have detailed YouTube videos and recommendations, information about specific camera models. So if there's a camera that you're using that you like, or maybe that you don't like that we haven't talked about, I would love to get that information so that I can share that more broadly. So I'm going to give you an overview of some of the cameras that we've been using, but we're going to be updating this in the future months and years. So keep an eye out for that site. It's not posted yet, but I will let people know. So my go-to camera right now is the FLIR Scout Pro. This is a relatively new camera, and it retails for $24.49. You can get it from FLIR directly or B&H, Photo Video. I know some state agencies have been able to get them for as low as $2,000. So see if you get a discount through your agency. And this is a good example of the specs that I look for. You want, for a thermal camera in particular, the biggest feature is going to be the resolution. And you want to make sure you're looking at the actual sensor resolution of the camera. Often they advertise up resolution, they interpolate the pixels. That doesn't count. All that really matters for our purposes is the actual sensor resolution. So look carefully beyond just what's advertised. 640 by 480 for a normal camera is extremely low, but for a thermal camera is actually on the high end. I have seen some cameras that are a little bit higher than that, but this is excellent for what we're shooting for. 30 frames per second is right around the range that I look for in a camera. 25 to 30 is usually good. And it has a field of view that is 32 by 24 degrees. This is right in the sweet spot. Often these monoculars are really zoomed in and they're too narrow. Now, it depends on the roost, depends on your situation. Sometimes you might want it or need it to be more zoomed in, but for general monitoring, somewhere between 30 to 40 degrees field of view is really great. And so all of those features are reasons why I really like this camera. I have also been able to find a way to record and set up this camera directly with some software that we developed. So we just released the ThruTracker recorder software. It is free for the next 2 years. It's on our website at the downloads page. And what is really exciting about this is we found a way to access settings in the camera that you can't even access on FLIR's software. And this allows you to adjust the brightness and contrast of the video, which is really key. There's situations where we just really could not get usable video unless you have access to these settings. For the FLIR Scout Pro, it does currently only run on Windows devices, so you will want to have a Windows tablet, or you can bring a laptop if you don't mind having the laptop in the field with you. And you can record to the camera, or you can stream it to your tablet or your Windows device. If you are streaming it to the Windows computer, you can set it up also for long-term recordings. On the camera itself, you can record about 2 hours at a time. If you're streaming it to a tablet, you can record for 12 hours at a stretch and program it. All right, we also have an Android version of the app. The Android version does not work with the Scout Pro. In fact, I did kill a camera that way because the tablet was trying to charge itself from the camera. So do not plug one of these cameras into an Android device. But we also have an Android version of the software for cameras that are made more for recording on phones. So I'll tell you more about those as well. So this would be another option. This would be on the lower end of the spectrum, one that I've just been able to test in the last couple of weeks. It's the Topdon Duo camera. You can find this in a variety of places. And this camera only costs $240, so a tenth of the price. Obviously, the image quality you're going to get is not going to be as good. You can see the resolution is quite a bit lower, but it's still usable. I'll show you some examples. You can get 25 frames per second recording if you use our app. In my testing using their native app, it was dropping a lot of frames, so it's not getting a steady video feed. So I would definitely suggest using our free app on Android if you're going to use this device, and that is going to get you a higher image quality and make it so you're not dropping frames, and that will allow you to be able to use that with ThruTracker. This camera has a wider field of view, which definitely is okay. I kind of like that in some situations, but it's going to mean that your placement of the camera, you're typically going to, combined with the lower resolution, you're going to need to get this camera pretty close to your roost. I would say this would be useful within about maybe definitely 5 meters up to maybe about 10 meters from a structure. That's going to depend on the temperature of the background. But I have been able to test this out and get just as accurate results under the right conditions. So I'm really excited about a situation like this. You could spend $250. If you have an Android phone, you can use that. I found some 2024 model Motorola phones for $130 that can be a dedicated recorder. So you could have a whole kit for $400 that you can send out. And compared to the other options for a dedicated thermal imaging system, in the right situation, I'm pretty excited about this kind of range of possibilities. So this is a comparison that I did recently, and we set out the FLIR Scout Pro and the Topdon Duo at the same location, and you can see how I set it up. I knew the resolution was lower on the Topdon, and it was more wider angle, so I had the Topdon camera much closer to the structure, and it was only filming a smaller part of the structure compared to the FLIR Scout Pro with that higher resolution. I knew I could get away with having a larger field of view. And this worked out quite well. This is showing some tracks of the same bats. They were filmed with a little bit different angle, but you can see because I had that camera closer, in the end, the image quality was actually quite similar. So on the left here was the Scout Pro, on the right was the Top Don. Again, these are cameras that one is 10 times as much as the other. And again, you'll be able to do more with the FLIR Scout Pro. And in certain situations, you would not be able to get away with using the less expensive camera. But I want people to know that there are options out there, especially if you're studying bats in like a Roost box, or Myotis bats that are coming out 1 or 2 or 3 at a time. You may be able to use a lower end camera for those situations. If you're recording large emergences of like gray bats to Derrida, you're probably going to need the higher end camera in that situation. So this is one roost that I've been talking with Jonathan Townsend in New York as an example of a place that we're going to test out the Top Don camera. So this is a location that historically had as many as 2,000 little brown bats. And as of 2016, they were down to 38 Myotis lucifugus. This year, they're estimating the numbers have rebounded up to about 400, and this is all based on visual counts. So I'm actually sending out 2 of these thermal camera kits to Jonathan, and he's going to test them out at these locations. And hopefully we can get simultaneous coverage of all 7 bat boxes with 2 relatively inexpensive kits. We'll see how well that works. I'll report back in the future. All right, this is one other camera that I have been testing out. I haven't been able to test it out on bats yet, but I have confirmed that it has good image quality. The resolution is intermediate of the other 2, and as is the price. This is a little bit more zoomed in, so depending on your situation, that might be beneficial, or you might prefer the wider field of view. So again, I'm working on, or we are as a team working on compiling data. So if you have videos using specific cameras that you want to recommend or not that you want to send us, I'll be putting the contact information. That'd be really helpful so that we can eventually have a whole list of cameras for people to compare and make the decision that works best for your situation. All right, one other camera system that I thought I would share is the only one that I'm aware of that has been built specifically for monitoring bats, and this was built in collaboration with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It's built by Intertest. It's the InfraBat system. As you can see here, it is a higher cost, $13,000 for the camera and the tablet. And it does have a good resolution, a little bit higher frame rate, and I'd say the biggest advantage here is that it has multiple lenses, that you can have wide angle or narrow angle lenses, and it's built specifically for bats. I have not personally been able to test it, but I wanted to share that information because of colleagues who have worked so hard to develop that. All right, I want to briefly mention near-infrared cameras. I do not currently have a specific recommendation for what near-infrared cameras to use, but I just want to at least mention it, that a lot of people are using near-infrared, and they are certainly useful and advantageous in some situations. When you're filming with near-infrared, then we're dealing with higher resolutions. I would suggest filming at HD 1920 by 1080 resolution. You don't need to film in 4K. Some people are sending me these huge videos. We're just getting blobs of bats. So a very detailed, highly pixelated blob doesn't really help us that much more. Similar frame rate of what we're shooting for. And here we are using near infrared. So in this situation, the lighting is going to be key. Having powerful infrared lights and knowing how to set them up. That is a whole nother tutorial. I'm not really going to get into the details here, but this can be advantageous if thermal is not working in your situation because maybe the background is too hot. Then going with near infrared definitely can be a good way to go. And generally, these can be more affordable. So I'll post more information about that. If people are interested in specifics, please let me know. This is one example. Angie McIntyre in Arizona has been, and a number of people in the Southwest filming Leptonicterus. And you can see that we're getting counts of upwards of 15,000 Leptonicterus at a cave using near infrared. And in some of these situations, we haven't been able to test it, but we could imagine in Arizona, if you're filming from outside, that heat on the background could make it really difficult for thermal imaging in some situations. And so this could be a case where near infrared would be the way to go. And then the final option is in some situations, we can just use a normal camera, like a camera on your phone. So again, I'd say similar quality as far as the resolution and frame rate. We don't really need a whole lot more than that. And typically, if you are going to use visible light, you would be filming in a situation that allows you to do that, where the bats are coming out when it's still somewhat light out, and you can film the bats with the sky in the background. I will show some examples of that as we talk about specific roosts, but I did want to just mention, if you're at a site and you're already doing visual counts and you can visually see the bats and you can get a sky backdrop, just prop up your phone or bring a tripod and film that, and we can potentially use that in ThruTracker. Okay, that's my quick run through on cameras, and I'm going to open it up for questions.
All right, so some of the questions that have come in regarding gating are, can you draw unique gates to indicate different roosts, or do multiple gates refer to the same roost?
Okay, so currently we have it set up so it's generating one count. You can draw multiple gates, but it's just adding all of that up. If you wanted separate counts within the same video, then that would be a feature that we'd need to add, but we can certainly do that.
Cool. And then building on that, is tracking specific to a specific bat or any bat that exits or enters the gate?
It's going to track anything that pretty much is moving. And so, for example, it will also potentially track insects, birds, bats of different sizes. It doesn't necessarily know what you want to track. In some cases, we're trying to detect really faint bats, and that's what we want to find, is these really small, faint targets. In other cases, the bats are really bright and big, and the small targets are either insects or distant bats that we want to filter out. But that is the benefit of the system. Once we get into showing off the software in the future, then we'll show you how you can tune in the settings to filter for specific types of targets. Now, I would say if you're trying to discriminate like similarly sized bats, that's probably not going to be possible. But so it's going to pretty much get anything within the range of targets that you have told the software to look for, if that makes sense. But we'll get a lot more detail on that in the next webinar.
Awesome. And then we're asking for clarification between the free version of the app available to 2027, which is for the cameras, and the paid version of the app, which might refer to the tracking software.
Yeah, so the main ThruTracker app is for processing the video, and that is licensed. For recording, that we're making the specific software that is made to record from cameras. That one is free. Hopefully that helps clarify.
Awesome. And then another question coming in just now is, how could you distinguish between bat species that use the same roost?
So that can be tricky. I would say that is definitely a frontier right now. If you had good enough image quality and the bats were sufficiently different in size or morphology, like one had really big ears, we could potentially generate a classifier to do that. If not, like even I was just on the Myotis velifer call yesterday, and a lot of people were talking about Myotis velifer and Tadorida co-roosting together. One possibility is if the bats are exhibiting different behaviors, like exiting in different directions, you could potentially get cameras on the different exit paths. But if they are similar sized, similarly looking species, and they're behaving similarly, video is not going to do it. We all know that sometimes we're identifying species by toe hairs, And we're not going to be able to see that in the video. So we might be leaning on other information, like being able to get a proportion, an idea of how many bats in the roost are one species or another, either based on visual counts or acoustics. We can sometimes use acoustics in combination with video, but I will just be straightforward that that's going to be a hard use case.
All right, and then leading into your next section is, have you tried monitoring tree roosts? And I will close questions at that and get at the rest of them later.
Yes, we have. And that leads into the final section that I'm going to talk about today. I can already tell that I'm not going to have time to really get into the software. And in this last section, I want to give some general recommendations and go through some examples of different kinds of roosts that we've been monitoring, that other people have been monitoring, starting with some general recommendations. If you've never tried to film bats before, how do you get started? The first one is that any system, we are relying on contrast, being able to see the bats in front of the background. With thermal, we're talking about temperature differences. So learning to be able to scan the environment and have an idea of what backgrounds are going to be usually colder than the bats. And those would be things like the sky. Usually the sky is going to be the best backdrop if you can get that, whether you're talking about thermal, light, infrared. If you can get the sky as a background, that's going to be fantastic. If not, then having these cameras where you can adjust the brightness and contrast can really help you pull out the bats from the background, but that's going to depend on the specific background. We'll go through some examples. Obviously, for light-based and infrared cameras, we're looking at brightness or light differences. So in those situations, for near infrared, for example, how you set up the lighting, whether that's right with the cameras or they could be placed maybe closer to the roost at an angle, those are going to be key factors in generating video that can be used for ThruTracker or other means. The second point is building off this concept of the virtual roost exit, that we're not necessarily having to focus on the roost itself. I'm more interested in the exit path of the bats. So yes, we typically do want to have the roost in view, but we also want to be thinking about where the bats are flying and try to frame it so that we're getting that exit path in view, and we'll be able to draw that virtual roost exit. In some situations, all we really need is one line or one part of our image to have contrast, like right here. We're getting that nice background with the sky. And if you can find one place that is a transect in your video, that might be all that you need. And you can pretty much ignore the rest of the image. If bats are circling in part of the image, or you don't have contrast in part of the image, it really doesn't matter. All that you need is part of your screen to be able to draw that gate through. Third is to consider filming from all perspectives. So think about this more like a photographer as opposed to a tourist. What does a tourist do? Tourist shows up and sees a pretty scene and takes out their camera and just films. I want you to think about it like a photographer. Okay, what sort of angles could I get here? Could I film this from below? Could I film this all the way from the side? Could I film it from inside looking out? So when you get to a site, have your camera, look at the different backgrounds, walk around the entire roost or structure and think about what perspectives you can get. Sometimes when you're first going to the site, the first night of recording is going to be more of a scouting mission. I would rather you move the camera around, try a few different angles, figure out where the bats are flying on that first night, and then come back and nail it the second night, than plop your camera in a location the first night and just stick with it because you've committed to it. If I'm recording and it's not working well, then I just take my camera, I walk around, and I try to find a better angle so that I can come back and really nail it the next time. All right, next I want to get into specifics for different roost types. Starting with bat boxes, they do tend to be on the easier side. So if you want to test it out, if you have a bat box, that's a great place to start testing these sort of things out. Because it's a relatively small structure, we know pretty much where the bats are roosting, and we can use a variety of different cameras for this, whether that's higher end or lower end thermal, near infrared, any camera can potentially work. If you can film with the sky as the backdrop, if the box is in the open, that again is going to be preferred. If it's mounted on a building, that's probably not going to be possible, although it might be if you film again from the side. So those are all things to consider. And I have tried filming almost directly below a bat box, which can work almost this angle here or even further below. And you get the bats dropping and then spreading out in different directions. So that can work if you're in, like as I was here, more of like a forested area, and you just need a pocket of sky above you. So again, this is a great one to kind of start with. Second, trees. I will show this video here that Layla sent to me from California, and if it's in the open, a tree could be similar to a bat box. This is a really cool one. Just make sure it's filmed from a tripod. Third would be buildings, and I already kind of showed some examples of this. Again, you can film from the front or the side. That's going to depend if you're using thermal on the temperature of the structure. If it's not too hot, you may be able to film it head on. If the structure itself is, and you're in a hot area, if it's really hot, you might need to film it more from the side. The bigger the structure, the more beneficial it's going to have one of the Scout Pro level or above cameras to get the size of that structure in the field of view. All right, caves. So I'm probably gonna do a whole webinar on filming graybat emergences. I got the pleasure of going out to Tennessee and Alabama early this summer, and we filmed a dozen different caves successfully, all of them ranging from a few hundred individuals to over 400,000. And a few tips in general for caves. Use the cold inside as a background if possible. For higher density emergencies, you're going to want a higher end camera. You can film inside if possible, and if that's safe and you have permits. Using the cold inside is going to be beneficial, or looking into the cave can actually work well. I used to not advise that, but with our newer features in the software, that is a possibility. There's a lot of different ways to work on this, and this is can be a more advanced situation, especially for gray bats or Mexican free-tailed bats. So if you're interested in that, make sure you're on our mailing list, and I'm going to plan a whole webinar just on monitoring gray bats. And I wanted to highlight this video. In this situation, I did not even mean to, but we were trying to film different situations. And in the background, you can see these hot spots. These are the actual bats roosting on the ceiling of the cave. And as the emergence went on, those little patches shrink down until you could just see the pups that were left. So this shows you how much you can do with this, and that there's all sorts of things I think that could be possible with thermal imaging that people haven't even really tried yet. This is one more that we filmed the same cave from the side. This was a really difficult one because the bats were going in both directions. They're circling around a lot, and there was a lot of depth in the field. But we were able to customize the software and get the tracking dialed in to be able to get those counts. All right, next up, bridges. Bridges are going to be one of the harder ones to film, depending on the behavior and location of the bats. Again, if you can film from below, the bats dropping out are actually warmer, and the bottom side of the bridge is cooler. So if you kind of have an idea of where the bats are and you can film them with thermal from underneath, that can really be beneficial. In some situations, you have really massive bats spread out and they're going all different directions. That can be one of the more difficult situations, and you might really need multiple cameras, as many as 3 or 4, to get full coverage in those situations. All right, we are almost at the top of the hour, so I will take this a last couple of questions, and while you queue those questions up, Kristen, I'm going to go to our last page here for folks who need to go and highlight that we have another webinar next week. We're going to show more examples and get into the software side of things. You can get all of the resources at ThruTracker-NABat.com/support. You can sign up for email updates and download the free trial. Let us know if you would like, if you're doing any monitoring related to white nose syndrome, and we'll be happy to get you a license for the next 2 years. And I'll take any remaining questions in the last couple of minutes.
All right. Well, I think one of the best questions to land on is what kind of collaborators or sites might be useful or interesting for you?
All of them. Yeah, it's been fantastic. I love, seeing the people on the ground. If you have sites where there's priority locations, like the Myotis lucificus site that I was talking about, or you think there might be a Roost where this technology would be helpful, and either you do have or you don't have the camera or expertise present, we are happy to help support that. And through the funds that we have acquired, we may be able to ship out cameras to people, help develop the expertise locally to be able to do this. And that's kind of how it grows. And once you get this system dialed in for a given location, then you can really replicate that year after year. And you could have a tech go out, have pictures of the site, put the camera here, and the video comes back, and you can use the same settings in the system and be able to replicate that and have verified numbers at those locations year after year.
All right. And then a great follow-up from Justin Boyles is, not sure how you would even get at this, but have you figured out a method to estimate error rates on cave counts, especially with gray bats?
Yes, we have. So that is something we're going to get into in the next one, which is, I have a slide here. We have a built-in, there's a new feature that we just built from this grant, is a built-in manual review. So the software will make short clips and it draws the bounding box for you. And then you step through it frame by frame, and you're just counting within these short clips. It can be 15 seconds, can be 30 seconds. It could be 1 second if the density is high enough. And it allows you to get a pretty precise estimate of how accurate your counts are. But we'll get into that definitely more next time. So we're at the top of the hour, so I'm going to stop it there. Thank you all so much for joining. Check out these resources, and please feel free to get in touch with any questions, comments, feedback that you have, what you'd like to see in the next one. And thanks again for joining.